Hey everybody, I think this is video number 5 now, but this will probably just be a short video, but I think it's something that we need to consider in order to frame things a little bit. Um, I think for those of us in the majority culture, those of us who are white Americans, sometimes we can view an incident such as this as an isolated incident, right? We kind of view it as like, well, that's just uh, one police officer and one situation and one man who happened to be black. Like we can kind of treat it as this isolated incident when in reality it's just not. Um, there is a historical narrative that has played out in our country since our inception, all the way back to slavery. There has been this history of racial injustice and brutality. There has been this history, in particularly, of black men and women being tragically killed, lynched, brutalized, dehumanized throughout the history of our country, most oftentimes with no legal consequences. In other words, black people have died at the hands of white people often, especially those in law enforcement or positions of power, and oftentimes throughout our history as a nation, no justice has been served. And so that has played out literally for hundreds of years. And so sometimes even, and I'm not that old, I'm 42, but I think especially maybe for generations even younger than I, we can look at the last 10 years and see what's happened from Trayvon Martin to now and think that it's just something unique in this decade. Or I should say for those from the majority culture, we can look at just this decade, but it's not. It goes back for hundreds of years. What is unique to this decade is cell phone cameras. We now have cell phone cameras where we can videotape injustices as they occur. But for all of the decades prior, there were no cell phone cameras. And too often, stories of injustice and abuse and lynchings were dismissed and minimized. And so I just need to push against. These are not isolated events. There is a historical narrative at work in our country, and we have to own that. We have to acknowledge it. We can't dismiss it. It's real history. And so I think it's important that we frame it in that light, that it's not it's not an isolated incident. It's part of a story, a narrative, a reality for black Americans that has played out in our country since its inception. And so we just need to acknowledge that not all of us have experienced America the same. I know that seems like such a simple statement, but I think for whatever reason, I'm not sure why. I think there's some fear involved. I think there's some guilt involved. I don't think we necessarily like to acknowledge that, but we need to, because it's just reality.